We're going to make this short and sweet. This is shading garments. What I'm going to use is this beautiful little lime number and the periwinkle. Pick whatever colors you want for this, and I'm going to use the lime for the top and then the periwinkle for the bottoms. Okay, so you go figure out what colors you want, and we will meet back here in 1 second. So once you have picked your colors and your light source, you're just going to go in, you're going to shade the whole thing with its base layer of color, just like how we did with the body tutorial. And then from there, we'll go in and we'll add shadows. When we get into shiny fabrics and sequins, we'll focus more on leaving highlights kind of lighter. But for basic garments, usually when we shade it, you don't see a stark bright white highlight, so you don't need to worry about leaving any part of the garment blank or with the paper showing through to create that white highlight. Once that's dry, you're going to go back in with that same color and then add another layer to create some shadow. So for this, you're going to make sure that these shadows are placed in anywhere that's opposite of the highlight, because we have like a little strap that is over the shirt. We're going to have a shadow on the opposite side from the light source around the neckline, because it's a change in angle of the fabric, which is creating a shadow. And then that back arm, since it's going back, the body is blocking light from reaching that right hand side arm. And so when you are throwing in these shadows with your marker, if you're using the same color one, then you can be a little bit more aggressive with the shadows that you place, because when you use the same marker and just put in multiple layers, then it's going to be darker but not like a drastic difference. So usually what I do is I do 1 or 2 layers of shadow with that same color marker, and then after that I'll go in with a darker green and fill in any like really dark shadows that are created. So your darkest values include areas like under the little strap of the overalls, and because there's fabric overlapping, so there's like no light being reached, and then part of the body that is opposite of the light source, so like the very opposite. So this would be on this garment, this would be your right arm, right as in looking at it, not her right, on the right side of the screen, that one, and the right side of the collar. So then after that, if I feel like the difference between colors is a little bit too stark, then I'll go back in with that lighter color, and this will kind of reactivate the alcohol in your markers, and it will kind of allow it to blend a little bit more. So when you do this, not only will that green blend a little bit more, it will also add just another layer of shadow between that green and your first value, your base layer, to create just a little bit of a smoother transition. But for the most part, there is going to be some kind of definitive line between there. But for the most part, when you look at your clothes, there is actually definitive lines of shadow. Once you let that dry, and you should let it dry, you can go in with the lilac, because if you don't let it dry, then it's going to reactivate that alcohol like we did with the chartreuse after putting that dark shadow, and then they're going to start bleeding together, and that's going to be a go. So don't do that. But instead, we're just going to let it dry for a second. It only takes like 30 seconds, and then you're going to go in with your other color, and you're going to shade the whole garment like we did earlier, just one whole base layer, circular motions, because otherwise you guys are going to be streaking up a storm. Okay, so one whole base layer, and then after that we can go back, we can find our shadows and lay those in from there. Oh, and another thing, make sure that you are still working in sections. This is super important, because otherwise you're going to have a little line in a weird spot where you stop shading, and then you're not going to be able to take that away, and it's going to be stuck there. Moving on to shadows, I know that you guys already know where shadows usually are, but with marker, I just want to make sure that you guys are just using a little bit lighter of a touch. You can always build it up, but with marker, as opposed to like pencil or charcoal, it's really hard to remove that. So once it's laid in, it's kind of permanent in a way. So when you are laying in these shadows, just make sure that you're filling in these darkest areas first, and then you can build out from around there. Your darkest shadows include, like I said before, opposite of the light source, so that side of the body, and then including any wrinkles that you have drawn in or should be placed where like a body part is crunched, or where there is movement of the body that's abnormal. So like that leg that's sticking out, that play leg, that's going to have a shadow right in like the crotch area, and then under the bust, and then opposite areas of the light source. Those are your main shadows, and then from there you can kind of build that up and make it darker if you need it to be. And when you go back the second time, you can actually create a line that overlaps that shadowed area and the base layer area, and this will kind of smooth out that dark shadow, like we did in the top with that dark green. This will just create a little bit of a smoother transition between the two, and if you hold your marker really lightly, that'll help make that transition even smoother. And so you can do that, and then from there I usually just go in and I just keep touching up those darker shadows, and I'll build up smaller shadows that I hadn't noticed the first time around. So like I did around the strap, or building up that area around the crotch or where the legs start, because there's not a lot of light being reached there, right? There's a lot of shadow. So, and then you just keep building it up like you would with any other medium, with pencil or charcoal or watercolor. You're just going to keep building up those shadows until you feel like you have reached a point where it's three-dimensional and it reads as a piece of clothing that's fitted to the body, rather than just like a little like shape that's going over the body, right? And because these are overalls, and overalls are not complete without a little center pocket, I am just going in and I'm just making this outline on the right side of the pocket, on our right side of the pocket, because that's where the shadow's created from the light source. So I'm just going to go and throw that in there, and then once that's done, you can let it dry, and then after that you can throw in any other shadows that you feel are necessary. Sometimes I like to let the whole thing dry for a little bit and then look back at it and be like, okay, so maybe the ink was just kind of like wet there and it looked darker than it actually is, and then you can go in and toss those shadows in later. That's the beauty of croquis. You can always go back, but sometimes it's hard to take away stuff. So, if you can't take away that, then just figure out how to make it work. Make it look intentional, right? Anyways, I was rambling while I was grabbing my metallic marker, and I'm going to toss in some little hardware for just those areas that I want it to pop, look a little bit metallic, those little buckles and the buttons. Metallic markers are not necessary. They're just something that I like to add because they're just like a little fun like moment of pizzazz, So, you'll find your thing that you really like obnoxiously. Nonetheless, I don't know, I digress. I just want to toss in some little pockets, and then I think we're going to call it a day. So when you are doing pockets, like I've said before, just make sure that it's, angled correctly with the body. You don't want your pockets to go horizontally when your hips are angled. So just make sure you take that into account. And would you look at that? We're done. Oh my gosh, 10 minutes. Boom.